Well, ladies and gentlemen, another week and the same story for the New York Football Giants. They lose this one on Thanksgiving, which really isn't a surprise to anybody. 27-20. The first half was close. The second half, not really. So that's as far as that goes. But the Giants have lost, I think, their seventh in a row. I believe it's their seventh in a row. If you take a look at the way things have gone. Bengals, Eagles, Steelers, Commies, Panthers. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, lost 7 in a row. Which, to be honest with you, I think is the worst since the Pat Shurmur days. And we're infringing upon the worst losing streak in history. Because I remember Pat Shurmur had a very long losing streak in his final year as Giants head coach. And I think it was like 6 to 8 games or something like that. And then we obviously have to look upon the worst season in New York Giants franchise history, which is not 19, which could be 2013, but not 2013, 2017, but it could also be 1966 with Ali Sherman as the head coach. And both of those years really, at least the way things are going in this slippery slope downhill, they're not really comparing to this. And you know what's interesting, right? What's interesting is, obviously, Ben McAdoo was fired after that horrendous season. Well, in the middle of that horrendous season, I should say, because, well, he benched Eli Manning, right? Doing my research now on Ali Sherman, was he fired after that horrific season? No, he wasn't. They ended up going 7-7, and then 7-7 again. Then they fired him years later. But we're also living in 2024. We're not living in 1966. That was about 58 years ago. So all I'm going to say is John Mara should be watching, and the fans should be as well. Because this is not a product worth watching. Again, like I've said, for the rest of the season. You got players getting injured. You have mismanagement all over, as we have covered repeatedly on this show. And it's starting to really get old, and I hate coming on here and just babbling about the same nonsense every week. And, of course, you got no leadership in that locker room because Malik Neighbors, I mean, he can go off, right? He could come out and say that the stuff about his drops. We're going to talk about that on the offensive side of the ball. And, of course, Drew Lock got his start at quarterback for the football Giants. And to be honest with you, and we could bridge this into the offense here, I don't know. Considering the circumstances and the circumstances and all these other different things that Drew Lock went through, and the $5 million incentives and this, that, and the third, well, I think he did decent. That's not some bar we have to set, but I think he did decent. 5.6 yards per pass, which is actually above Cooper Rush. But then again, you also have that last drive factored in. You have 21 of 32, 178 yards, six sacks taken. As I said, I thought he did decent. Now, they have, I think, 10 days till the next game, which is against the New Orleans Saints. They have no more primetime games, none of that stuff, unless for some reason the NFL puts the Giants-Eagles or Giants-Colts game on like a primetime window or something like that, or a Saturday night game, which, to be honest with you, I really don't see happening, considering the state of the team. But I'm just, making my points here. I think Drew Lock did a fine job, and of course in these 10 days, they'll evaluate who is the quarterback moving forward, who may not be the quarterback moving forward. I'd like to think that they're going to keep Tommy DeVito at quarterback, though Lock was better because they only went to Lock because of the injury. And I feel like if you're Brian Dable, you don't want to really go back on your decision to go to DeVito rather than Lock, which would potentially hurt Lock's feelings. But at this point, I don't know that they care about feelings. I think they're coaching for their jobs at this point. And I don't know, it would just look flimsy. It would look bad either way. It's a lose-lose situation, but that's what happens when you're 2-10. You go with DeVito, you piss Locke off after a decent performance, and Locke is on the bench for the incentives. So you have that, or it's the other way around where you started DeVito originally, Locke has looked better this entire time, and you're in that. So, as I said, I thought the Giants moved the ball at a decent pace on offense, objectively. But the penalties, I mean, this is a team that's undisciplined as of the last 2 games. Obviously, they didn't even show up against the Bucs. This game, for some reason, they showed up. Whether it's Dable talking to them, Shane talking to them, Mara talking to them, whatever, or just players standing up and saying, we got to be better than this. They had 13 penalties for 98 yards. And just figure, right, what would those 98 yards have been better in, right? How could you have used those 98 yards better than in terms of penalties? I mean, you had defensive penalties. You had a lot of pre-snap stuff. So it just wasn't good. It just wasn't a good offensive side of the really, to be honest with you, if you're a fan that was looking at this game, whether you're a Giants fan or a Cowboy fan, this was a pretty shitty game. It's a pretty shitty game, right? This didn't deserve to be on Thanksgiving. You'd rather probably watch the dog show or the parade, the rewatch, than something like this. But it's Thanksgiving, football's on, and obviously the Giants and the Cowboys with their backup quarterbacks, second string, both of them were made to be put in this game. So Drew Lock, I mean, maybe 1 or 2 sacks were on him, but I just felt like the O-line was getting ambushed the entire game, which is something I called even with DeVito possibly being the starter in the preview, because you had Dallas, who was one of the top blitzing teams across the NFL. I think they were like 5th. Top 10 definitely, excuse me. And you had Micah Parsons, who, he always feasts against the Giants. You have DeMarcus Lawrence, who always feasting against the Giants. Carl Lawson, who's playing for a contract, I believe, because I remember last year he got cut by the Jets. He's been, a couple of different teams. And, he's trying to make a comeback in his career right now. And then you also have Eric Kendricks and a couple other guys who got in on the sack party. And so that's the way, at least that was displayed. Now, one of the crucial mistakes, in my opinion, was why they ran away from the running game very early, because the Giants were pounding it that first drive with Tyrone Tracy. They were, doing a couple of different things on offense, but they seemed to move away from the run. And I talked about this in the preview show. Specifically, what I said was, hey, if you want to keep this game competitive, if you want to be in the game, whatever, you got to go out there and, you got to go out there, run the football, time of possession. You got to limit them on defense, which the defense did a halfway decent job. There's some things that I'm not happy about because at the end of the day, you gave up really 20 points. 27 is not really the real thing because Drew Lock obviously threw the pick 6 to DeMarvion Overshone. But for some reason, I didn't really get as to why Tyrone Tracy got the ball moved away from him. I don't know if that's a game plan thing, a strategic thing, a benching thing. I also think that they gave too many carries to Singletary because it seemed like Singletary either was in situations where it was not going to be a successful run at all, or it's like it's going to kill the vibe, right? His longest carry was for 7 yards, as was Tyrone Tracy, but Tyrone Tracy was also picking up the first down in a couple of scenarios. He was also on the receiving end of some things where Singletary really doesn't give you that value. So as far as that goes, I thought the running game, it could have been implemented a lot more. And obviously, if you look at the grand scheme of things in the rushing game on the stat sheet, it looks good. But it's really not that good because Locke obviously had that big 28-yard run. I think he had 2 nice runs during the game. Maybe one of them was called back by a penalty, but almost a touchdown. Locke obviously got a rushing touchdown too on the side. But, so that's That's where things squared away for the New York football Giants in the rushing game. Malik Neighbors had to carry for 4 yards. As I said, Singletary, 7 carries, 23 yards. So I didn't really get the approach. I'm going to be honest with you. I really didn't get the approach for the rushing game. As I said, it was a little strange. I'm not really, as you can see, I'm not really mad about it because I'm kind of just used to this ineptitude on offense. But you should give Tyrone Tracy some carries and a little bit more and pound the rock that way. Maybe it wasn't working. Maybe I'm not looking at the film correctly. Maybe I'm looking at something else. But at the end of the day, I just don't think that you should have went away from the run as soon as you did. So that's really all I have to say on the rushing game. Now, as far as the receiving game goes, obviously, again, Locke, 178 yards. Let's talk about Malik Neighbors. So, I gave him a pass last week about him basically saying, oh, well, asked Dable why I didn't get the ball, and we were down 30-0, and that thing. And I'm like, you know what? He's right? If you don't, they drafted Neighbors over a quarterback or any other position. They took Malik Neighbors, and Malik Neighbors said in the Combine interview, he said, hey, I hate losing more than I like winning, which is, it's obviously great. You have that dog mentality, and that's where it comes in. Don't draft a dog if you don't expect it to bark or potentially bite at some point, right? So here's where I'm going to start drawing the line in terms of my defense for Malik Neighbors. Here, we're going to draw a line on this piece of paper, this index card I have right here with this pencil. Is Malik Neighbors said after the game, he said, let's take a look here. I have it on a screenshot to somebody. Because I want to get the term correct. I want to get the term correct. Because if I don't, then we're all going to be in trouble. Okay. I don't care about drops. I mean, it's just part of football. I don't care if I drop the ball 6 times, keep throwing me the ball. So that could be construed in 2 different fashions. That could be construed in the fashion of like, okay, well, listen, he knows his mistakes. He's going to be productive even if he does drop the ball, right? Because you do see wide receivers around the league who, obviously they drop a lot of passes, but they're very productive, right? I think Jamar Chase's first year led the NFL in drops, but he was one of the best receivers and still is one of the best receivers in the NFL. Lucky enough, he goes to LSU just like Malik Neighbors. I'm not comparing him to that because we are not in that stage yet. Now, coming off of a loss on a team that's 2-10 to a guy who's been speaking to the media the way he has over the last few weeks. And I'm not saying this is the end-all, be-all issue with the New York Football Giants. I'm not saying that. But to come out there and say something like that in that context, maybe reporters aren't giving us the full truth, the full story, and this, that, and the other thing, right? Those are not wise words. I'm not really down with that. I'm not down with that because he, as I said, I supported him last week when he talked about 30-0 and he wasn't getting involved. Now he's talking up a storm, which is a product of multiple things, and it could be a tsunami. I'll explain that in a second. That is a more than likely, unless I am proven wrong on something and I see like a video clip and something like that, because we didn't actually see video clips from the locker room, or at least that many. That could be construed in terms of there is no leadership on this team. Dexter Lawrence, obviously, he's down with an injury. He's probably out the rest of the season. Andrew Thomas, he is out with an injury. He is out for the rest of the season. Daniel Jones is no longer on this team. There's no Saquon Barkley. There's none of those leaders. Like, take all the injuries and all that other shit. Who is a leader in the locker room right now? Like, I don't think it's Brian Burns. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I don't think it's Kayvon Thibodeau. We just saw, Dexter Lawrence. Obviously, he was out the entire second half. Yeah, in terms of offensive side of the football, I mean, Slayton's not a leader. Devin Singletary's not a leader. John Runyon's not a leader. Tell me who's a leader in that locker room. And that's not just on the leaders of the locker room, the players. That's on the coach too. Because you're coaching for your job and this, that, and the other thing. And it's just so weird with the optics, right? We saw what happened with Daniel Jones. We saw what happened with Deonte Banks, where he was benched on and off against the Steelers for some of his play against the Eagles, and for some of his play against the Steelers where he was missing tackles and stuff like that. So the last few weeks, right, players like Dex and Brian Burns especially, more so Brian Burns, have said this team is soft, this team plays like ass, whatever. And it's just a weird thing going on where you had that. I think they said that against the Panthers, or he said that against the Bucks. And then you had you had Neighbors say what he said against the Bucks. You had Micah McFadden eventually come out, and then John Runyon followed him, and then Brian Dable said it. Oh, these guys showcased a good effort. Well, effort doesn't matter if the results aren't there. So you're breeding losing, you're accepting losing, you're making excuses to justify losing. So you're trying to keep this all hush-hush that this operation has failed. So that's one thing. You're not, after this whole benching shit with Jones and Banks and whatever, you're not trying to be this bad man on campus. You're trying to be this good man on campus. And now Neighbors is shooting his mouth off. Which, again, for the 90th time, I gave him a pass last week because I agreed with him. This is where it's no good. Because it's not just, oh, well, there's no leadership in the locker room and stuff. He is 21 years old. Right. What happens if Brian Dable gets fired after this year? And you bring in a guy like Mike Vrabel, or you bring in some stern head coach, maybe like an Aaron Glenn, right? Obviously, we'll talk about head coaching candidates at the end of the season if Brian Dable does get canned. But what happens if you bring in a guy like that, whether he's a mid-level guy or he's no nonsense and he's going to change the culture? What do you think Malik Neighbors is going to do when all of that shit happens? Someone's going to tell him, shut your mouth and play. I think someone, that one quote from that Fox analyst was like, shut up and dribble. Well, this time it's shut up and catch the ball, I guess. And once again, I'm not totally disagreeing with what Malik Neighbors has been saying all along, but this guy hasn't been in the league enough, and he hasn't accomplished enough to sit here and say, keep throwing me the ball even if I drop it. Like, what does that say? What does it send a message to everybody else in the locker room? Like, fuck the fan base for 20 seconds. Fuck the media. What does it say to everybody else in the locker room when, there are going to be players, let's be honest, whether Joe Schoen gets fired or not, or whether Brian Dable gets fired or not, that these guys are going to be here for a number of years. Like, Malik Neighbors is going to be one of them. Tyrone Tracy's going to be one of them. What message are you sending to the rest of the locker room by saying some shit like that? You're not sending a good message at all. So the problem with this is it's not going to get solved until somebody steps up or the end of the season or pretty much when a new coach comes in, because you can't talk like that. And, it's not just us that are like, why would he say something like that? There's probably players in the locker room. And, with this losing that's been going on with the New York Giants, to be completely honest, there's not going to be an end to this. It's going to keep going until the end of the season. And they're going to have more players speak out. And then that's going to be the end of Brian Dable's job. So that's where I'm sitting here and saying, okay, you really can't say that. So that's just me. You guys agree, disagree? Let me know in the comment section, of course. So some other stuff on offense. I know, obviously, there are certain situations you really can't plan for, right? If your top two tackles go down and you go to the bottom and stuff like that. But the optics by the Giants, as I've said, are very weird, right? They're very weird. So I'm not really going after Runyon or Van Roten because I thought they played decent. Obviously, the O-line gave up 6 sacks, so I'm not even going to touch that in terms of their individual play, because I'm really focusing more on the positions that Joe Schoen has missed or neglected on. And of course, he missed on the guard spots in the first 2 years, but that's a different entity. So Evan Neal looked atrocious. There was one play where Parsons, I think, turned him around, and Neal looked like he was rushing Drew Lock instead of Micah Parsons. So there's that. You had Chris Hubbard, who was terrible, and you had John Michael Schmitz, who, we knew that Evan Neal was trash. We knew that he was a bust. We know that Chris Hubbard is not a NFL starter anymore. He used to be, right? He used to be with the Pittsburgh Steelers for a number of years. He used to be with the Tennessee Titans the Cleveland Browns for a number of years, and then he went to the Titans, I think. So he's not a starter in the NFL anymore, and especially with the way this line has been playing and whatnot. But you have John Michael Schmitz, who is your second-year center, and people are saying he regressed. Well, how low are we setting this bar, right? We had some not big, but like some solid expectations for John Michael Schmitz when he came out. He didn't do that good, and we attributed that to coaching. We said Bobby Johnson fucked him up, and Carmen Bricillo is going to fix him in year 2. Well, there's no excuse anymore to say it's on coaching, because Carmen Bricillo is one of the best O-line coaches in the league. He's not Mike Munchak level, but he's still a good O-line coach. Like, there is a couple of different teams around the league that probably kill for him at their respective coaching position. So this directly goes on John Michael Schmitz, right? Allowed 3 of the 6 sacks against the Cowboys. That's not good. Second-round pick, and what's worse is you're in a division, and this is respectively on Joe Schoen and Brian Dable, but I'll put it on Joe Schoen a little bit more because you spent a second-round pick on a center, and it hasn't worked out so far. You're in a division with tough trenches. The Commanders are fixing their trenches a little bit more, right? And it's not like it's this best year, this great year for the NFC East where every team is dominating. No, everybody's up and down. Washington's going through their fair share of struggles. You have the Eagles, who look like the top thus far, but they were in the middle, per se, winning games very tightly. And then you have Dallas, obviously, who you've lost to twice. And, they've had their fair share of struggles because they're under 500, of course. But coming into last season, the season before that, but really by year 2, you should have figured out, right, that this is a division, and this is, coming from the time around that Jonathan Allen was healthy, Daron Payne was still there, Chase Young, Montez Sweat, and some of these other cats in the Washington, football team era, Commanders, whatever you want to call them, and then obviously Dallas and Philadelphia. My point is, I don't know specifically what's wrong with John Michael Schmitz. I'm sure there's going to be those film analysts that go over that type of shit. I know he's very much undersized for a center, but it's starting to look really bad for a second-round pick, and Joe Schoen has not hit on any O-lineman. And again, the crucial part is you're in the NFC East with trenches stacked everywhere, right? The Giants couldn't touch the fucking quarterback, okay? They couldn't touch Cooper Rush. Right? Their run defense was trash. So you're giving more credit than due for the Dallas trenches. The Eagles. Hell, you got Lane Johnson, you got Jordan Mailata. They're running out of guys, but they're also putting in guys, right? They turned Mekhi Becton into a capable starter. Bobby Johnson looks like a halfway decent genius over in Washington. So we're saying all these different things, but it's Bobby Johnson's fault, it's this one's fault, and we're trying to make excuses. And then we have John Michael Schmitz giving up 3 of the 6 sacks. I mean, this is a second-round pick, and you're in one of the toughest divisions in football trench-wise. So that's where I say, no good. And again, it's a bigger indictment Not just that one, but it kind of reminds you every single week when the tackles give up sacks. Because, yes, I know Luminor's hurt, and he's probably going to come back against the Saints. And if he doesn't come back against the Saints, he'll come back against the Ravens. Is that you drafted Josh Azudu to be a guard, and you played him at tackle the last 2 years, a position where he's not good. You only think he's good there because of his feet. And he was absolute trash, right? Human trash against the Philadelphia Eagles. So then you have to sign somebody off of a practice squad to start for him because he's so trash. And then you finally put Evan Neal into the lineup, 9-10 weeks in the season. And how many weeks without Andrew Thomas? So it's just utter mismanagement by this Giants organization in terms of the O-line and so many other positions across the team, really. I just want to remind you folks, if you guys are going to a ball game of some sorts, you guys are going to concert, parking passes for a tailgate, $20 off your online order with the promo code Big Blue in the Bronx on SeatGeek.com. That's SeatGeek.com. And, of course, $20 off with the promo code Big Blue in the Bronx. Now let's attack this defense. So, PFF credited the Giants defense with 14 missed tackles. Now, obviously we have not played the full slate of week 13 yet, but to see if they updated it, and I believe they did, the chart here for missed tackles on ProFootballReference.com. So the Giants are, I think, 10th in the league in missed tackles. Let's see. That's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They're 11th. They're 11th with 73 missed tackles. And, of course, you'll have other teams that haven't played yet miss some tackles and whatnot. So there is that. But it's still not good to have 14 missed tackles in one game, and you had, I think, 9 to 10 in the first quarter alone. And it's so sad because this is not a team that likes to run the football. You look at the efficiency and the this, the that, whatever. Dallas, even with Cooper Rush, still likes to pass the ball a little bit more. They were just able to get some ground in their running game, right? Cooper Rush, obviously, he's not this prolific passer. He's not this generational passer. He gets the job done as a game manager, right? 21 to 36, 1 tutty, 195 yards. I bet you those yards would have gone up if the Giants hadn't allowed so much on the ground. Rico Dowdle. This is not some generational running back here. This is not prime Zeke. This isn't Derrick Henry. This is Rico Dowdle, who had 5.1 yards per pop and 1 touchdown. And his longest run was 22 yards. So factor that in with what's coming up and what we have on our plates, right? DJ Davidson got hurt. Dexter Lawrence is probably out for the rest of the entire season. And Nacho was also hurt. So you had the second half mainly boasted by Elijah Chapman, who was an undrafted free agent, and Jordan Riley, who's been active for most of the season, which, that kind of puzzled me. So you have that, which, once again, indictment on this regime for not getting proper defensive linemen. And you have the next few weeks where you're not going to have Dexter Lawrence. You're going against Bijan Robinson. You're going against Alvin Kamara. You are going against Derrick Henry. You're going against Saquon Barkley again. And you're going against Jonathan Taylor. So good luck. And it's a bigger indictment on this regime because Wink had one of the best run defenses in Baltimore for a number of seasons before he came here, and the run defense was trash. You had one of the best run defenses in Tennessee under Shane Bowen. His pass defense wasn't great, but his run defense was pretty good, right? You had Jeffrey Simmons, who's a similar Dexter Lawrence type, and they had all these different guys, and you still can't stop the run. And arguably with better players, because you do have Micah McFadden, who's a solid linebacker. Bobby Okereke has completely fallen off. I don't know what his deal is. Drew Phillips is a nice addition. But Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau, non-factors against the run. And, of course, your front is trash because you don't have Dexter Lawrence, so you have all these misfit toys in there. And Musau, for some reason, is still getting playing time, which, honestly, I'd rather play Isaiah Simmons in there. It seems like he's only on for specials and third down. Honestly, at this point, you should activate Deontay Johnson because at least he fits the scheme and was playing really well in the preseason. but he had that injury towards the end of the preseason to where they put him on IR. I just don't see the reason as to why you can't, try him out, because this run defense is trash. So that's one of the biggest ones. And again, when you face 5 teams with really good running backs coming up, it's not going to get any better. So it's going to get actually worse to where, I don't know what's going to happen with the next coaching staff, but when Dable gets fired, is the consideration to even say, okay, Shane Bowen, should he return? The answer is probably no. And you also have to reflect that on a different side of the football. Yes, the pass defense was good, and I reflect a lot of that on CeeDee Lamb dropping the football and not being healthy, because in the second half, something happened where he fell. I think Drew Phillips tackled him, and he was pretty much not the same, wasn't really in the game much after that. But again, that part has to be reflected on the fact that you don't have any corners, right? You have Cordell Flott, Banks was inactive. You had Art Green, who you signed off of Denver's practice squad. You had, him. You had Drew Phillips, who's a third-round pick. I'll give you credit on that one. You also had Dane Belton giving up yards to... There was one guy that was really destroying us. Shoemaker. Towards the beginning of the game, Luke Shoemaker was destroying us over the middle, and Dane Belton was covering him, so that's another great investment right there. So you had those guys in the secondary, and, that's, again, you're not really supplying that's where I don't like Shane Bowen's scheme 100%. I'm not going to say that I do, because, I'd be lying to you. I like a little bit more of an aggressive scheme. But when there are certain parts of the defense that you're not really putting him in a position to succeed, that's where I worry. Because, okay, you could say what you want, Burns, Tibbs, Dex, edges, and linebacker stuff. But as far as depth at D-tackle and corner, it's trash. It is trash. And that's where people are, saying, oh, that's player development. Yeah, it's also the guy who brings in the goods in Joe Shane. Now, I will say this. Whether it's a scheme thing or an investment thing, it still kind of falls on both. Is this, right? Kayvon Thibodeau, 2 quarterback hits. Brian Burns, no quarterback hits, but for some reason he got PFF's highest grade. You got Burns, who's getting paid next to $30 million a season. You got Kayvon Thibodeau, who's got his 5th-year option next year for next to $20 million almost. And Thibodeau, who's obviously right now number 5 overall pick of 2022 draft. These guys are not showing up. And, of course, it's on the player, right? Thibodeau, I've said it for a while, he's underwhelmed. You wouldn't need to get a Brian Burns if Thibodeau was really living up to his draft status. You didn't trade Ojulari for picks, and he's on IR now. So you have Timon Fox and all these other different guys behind them. So you can't even give them proper rest. But it's just another bad set of investments. Like, if you want to argue with me, okay, Tibbs is just underwhelming and it's not really on Shane, go ahead, right? Take that. But the Brian Burns trade it doesn't look good, because you're not in a win now year. Your team is 2-10. You traded a 2-5, and he's got 5 sacks on the season when you expected him to be this Batman, not a fucking Robin. And let me mention this too. 4 games passed by, right? Washington, you have the Panthers, you have the Bucks, and you have the Cowboys. The Giants have 1 sack, okay? The Giants have 1 sack by their total defense in those 4 games, right? They have now shrunk. They're still at 5, but they'll probably be lower in the list as we move forward throughout the rest of the Week 13 slate. And that sack was a bad sack taken by Bryce Young in Germany. So there's that. But to think that, you could maybe rip Dex a little bit, but also he's been doubled and triple teamed, so he had 9 sacks. So he gets a little bit of a mulligan. But to think Kayvon Thibodeau, 5 overall, Aziz, after you declined to trade him, and Brian Burns, who you traded for, and you signed him to nearly $30 million a year, they can't produce sacks, and they're supposed to be vaunted defense. I don't know what to say, man. It's a bad set of investments. It's the island of misfit toys. So that's pretty much that. As far as any final thoughts, go check out my rant video because, obviously coming out of a loss, and this is like my final thoughts. Coming out of a loss, right, I do expect, certain people to be like, yeah, fire Dable, fire Shane, or fire Dable only, whatever. But then you got media and certain fans buying into that we should keep both of these guys when considering that this was a winnable game, the winnable game of the second half, considering what your personnel looked like, what your team looked like after the bye and even before the bye, doesn't make any sense. And as I say in the video, the Giants are lined up right now to have probably the worst losing streak in their franchise history. And please tell me as to why that warrants these guys coming back. Like, why does that? If you're telling me, if you're a reporter and you're the beat media, you're trying to hold these guys accountable, you're telling me that these guys should come back and pick their own QB, but you also told me weeks ago John Mara did not influence the quarterback signing of Daniel Jones to that massive extension. Which one is it, right? The Giants, let's see, I think I said 12 games they're looking to lose because you're not beating the Eagles, you're not beating the Ravens, definitely. There's a couple of games you could mince out, but, who knows? It's better off to lose. Let's see, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 games. As I said before, this is going to be the worst losing streak in history. And to think whether you're tanking or you're losing or you're just too bad, to think that these guys should be kept because of their management, the roster, and the player development. And, again, I'll say this, and I don't really want to go too much on it because you guys can just watch the video. It's a little shorter. You're a free agent. You're Shadur Sanders, you're Cam Ward, or any of those guys. Why would you want to come here knowing what the shit show of the 2024 season looked like? And by the way, this is the 100th season of Giants football, so I'll put that in there. Like, comment, subscribe, folks. Turn off post notifications so you know when the live stream pops or video drops. I appreciate you guys coming back. I'm going to try to get some more videos out. I know, obviously, the Giants one was a little special one I had to do, and we're going to try to pump out some content for the Yankees offseason. But I appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to you soon.